Union bosses, revolutionaries, or compromised opportunists. Union bosses, once seen as champions of the working class, fighting tirelessly for justice and fair treatment. They were the revolutionaries who built the labor movement brick by brick, giving a voice to the voiceless. But today, that image has been tarnished. Too often, union bosses are accused of corruption, compromise, and self-interest. Are they still the revolutionaries we need, or have they become opportunists, exploiting the very workers they were meant to protect? Part 1. The revolutionary spirit of early union leaders. Unions were born out of necessity. Workers faced grueling conditions, long hours, and dangerous workplaces with little hope of recourse. Early union leaders were revolutionaries in every sense of the word. They faced opposition from powerful corporations, government crackdowns, and even violence. Leaders like Eugene Weigach, Debs, and Samuel Gompers were fearless in their pursuit of justice. They organized strikes, negotiated contracts, and demanded dignity for workers. These were leaders who put their lives and reputations on the line, driven by a singular goal: to uplift the working class. This revolutionary spirit defined unions for decades, making them a cornerstone of the American workforce. Part 2. The rise of union power and the corruption that followed. By the mid-20th century, unions had become a force to be reckoned with. They held immense power, influencing industries, politics, and even national policies. But with great power came temptation. Union bosses, once the embodiment of worker solidarity, began to lose sight of their mission. Corruption crept in as some leaders prioritized personal gain over the needs of their members. Ties to organized crime, embezzlement, and backroom deals became all too common. Take Jimmy Hoffa, the infamous leader of the Teamsters Union. While Hoffa was undeniably a champion for workers, his dealings with the mob and misuse of union funds overshadowed his accomplishments. His story became a cautionary tale of how power can corrupt even the most charismatic leaders. Part 3. Compromise and collusion with employers. One of the most damaging trends among union bosses today is their alignment with employers. In theory, unions exist to challenge corporate power and advocate for workers. But in practice, some union leaders have become little more than extensions of management. This compromise often manifests as union bosses holding dual roles, representing the workers while also acting as company liaisons. These conflicted loyalties leave workers unrepresented and vulnerable. Decisions that should benefit the members are instead made to protect the interests of employers, eroding trust in unions. When union bosses prioritize their own relationships and financial security over the needs of their members, the result is a hollow union, a name with no substance. Part 4. The impact on workers and public perception. The actions of compromised union bosses don't just harm their members, they damage the reputation of unions as a whole. Workers begin to see unions as self-serving bureaucracies, not the vehicles for change they were meant to be. This erodes trust, discourages unionization, and weakens collective bargaining power. Public opinion shifts, with unions often viewed as relics of a bygone era rather than essential advocates for the modern workforce. This loss of faith is evident in the numbers. Union membership has plummeted in recent decades, with only about 10% of workers belonging to unions today. When leaders fail to lead with integrity, the entire labor movement suffers. Part 5. Are union bosses revolutionaries or opportunists? Not all union bosses are corrupt or compromised. Many still fight tirelessly for the rights of their members, embodying the revolutionary spirit of the past. They stand on the front lines, challenging powerful corporations and advocating for fairness and dignity in the workplace. But for every dedicated leader, there are those who have strayed from the path. Opportunists who exploit their positions for personal gain. The question we must ask is this: How do we hold union bosses accountable while preserving the integrity of the labor movement? Part 6. The Path to Accountability and Reform. The solution lies in transparency, accountability, and reform. To restore trust in unions, we must demand more from their leaders. Transparency. Union leaders should be required to disclose financial records, decision-making processes, and the outcomes of negotiations. Members deserve to know how their dues are being used and whether their interests are truly being represented. Conflict of interest policies. Leaders must not hold positions that compromise their ability to advocate for workers. Strict policies should prevent union bosses from having ties to management or external entities that could influence their decisions. Empowered membership. Workers must have a greater say in union operations. This includes voting on leadership, contracts, and key decisions, ensuring that power remains with the members, not the leaders. Legal and ethical oversight. Strengthen labor laws to address corruption and provide real consequences for union leaders who betray their members. Empower organizations like the National Labor Relations Board to act decisively against misconduct. In conclusion, union bosses hold immense power. The power to uplift workers or to exploit them. Whether they are revolutionaries or compromised opportunists depends on their actions, their priorities, and their integrity. The labor movement can still be a force for good, but it requires leaders who embody the principles of fairness, solidarity, and justice. It's time to demand accountability, to expose corruption, and to restore the revolutionary spirit that unions were founded upon. Workers deserve leaders they can trust, leaders who will fight for their rights, not their own gain. The question isn't just whether union bosses can change, it's whether we, as workers, are willing to demand the change we deserve.